Hi, you're watching The Real Story. I'm Lori Perez. Connecticut has a governor-elect, one governor-elect, after a tumultuous few days of election controversy. In the end, though, the numbers ended any confusion, and today Dan Malloy is the victor. He is here now to talk about the road ahead. Thanks, Dan, for being here.
It's great to be here.
Joining us in the discussion is also reporter Christine Stewart of Connecticut News Junkie and Pat Scully of The Hanging Shed. Thanks, guys, for being here.
Thank you.
I'll let Pat, you can start off our questioning.
Well, Mr. Governor-elect, I've seen you since the election. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I also noticed that your transition includes your ties.
Yeah.
You wore green ties throughout the entire campaign. So anyway, I thought I'd represent.
Well, I appreciate it. I'll tell you the story about that. I started where we cleared a big hurdle on April 30th, which is we had completed raising $250,000 at $100 or less contributions. So the next day we announced that. That was the first day of the green tie exclusive that ran. The original plan was to have it run through the convention. Then the convention turned out pretty well, so I went through the primary. The primary turned out pretty well. I went to the general, and even on the 3rd of November, wore a green tie. Now I'm going back to my normal wardrobe. We'll circulate them.
Well, I've got a whole closet full.
But in a nice little note, you said you have a good plan for some of those ties.
Yeah, I'm taking the ties that I wore during that cycle and giving them to charity for charity auctions. So the guys at a radio station, PLR, are going to auction off one of the ties. Actually, I promised them either the one I wore at convention or primary night. So I got to figure out what I'm going to give them.
Excellent. Very nice. All right.
As far as a serious question, yesterday the current governor, Jody Well, talked briefly about the budget situation. Now, I know because you talked about it at such length, you're well prepared for the fiscal mess that we have and have a plan to address it. But did it bother you that the governor said, I'm handing off a balanced budget?
Well, I mean, clearly, first of all, I don't know what I'm getting. I had expected that I would receive a budget document. So, in essence, a real budget. Apparently, I'm not going to receive that on Monday. What I'm going to receive is a summary of I guess, calculations of where we are. And until I get to see that document, it's hard for me to prejudge it. But it clearly is not going to be a budget. So I'm not really sure what I'm going to get. We'll pick it up. We know that the state is in a very bad condition. We know that we're looking at a tremendously large deficit situation, representing probably $3.4 billion in deficit. Somebody's got to straighten that out. We've decided that it goes to the next governor, and I happen to be the next governor, so we're going to have to figure this thing out, work between myself and an incoming administration and the legislature to get to the point where we have a balanced budget.
Does it make things more difficult, though? I mean, when you talk about it, without some new revenue, you're either going to have to destroy the contracts with the unions, devastate state services, and pass along a huge property tax increase to the local cities and towns.
Listen,
I mean,
if we laid off every state employee on the first day of the budget and didn't rehire them to the last day of the state budget, we'd still be in deficit.
Right.
So there is no easy way out of this thing. It took us years to get to this point. I mean, one of the things that I always talk about, and you know, it's tremendously boring, but we're going to change how we account for our expenses. Generally accepted accounting principles will be the law of the state of Connecticut by next spring. I'll execute an executive order on the first day of that I'm governor that will require all commissions, agencies, and departments to report to me under GAAP. I will sign no state budget until GAAP has become the law of the state of Connecticut, and we're going to go from there. So we're going to be transparent. We're going to talk the same language. People are going to know how bad things are. This is really ugly right now. We haven't told ourselves the truth. We've pretended we were in surpluses when we weren't in surpluses. We're going to change this.
Let me tell you, but speaking of telling the truth, you often along the campaign trail said, I'm being honest. I'm not going to say that we're not going to have taxes. That was one of your, lines along the campaign trail. And, just this week, Senator McKinney and Larry Cafaro said they're going to resist any new taxes. I mean, that must be frustrating. I mean, you haven't even started the job and you're already getting pushback.
Well, listen, I've been in politics for a period of time. I've been in government for a period of time. People like to take positions even if they know that they're untenable. I refused to say that I was going to take anything off the table. The members of the media put me under tremendous pressure. My opponent put me under tremendous pressure. I was not going to change my position. Everything's on the table. Everyone's invited to the table. We're going to find a way out of this. It may take us more than a single year to undo the damage that's been done, but we begin by telling the truth, which is generally accepted accounting principles.
What is the budget? What is the budget deficit when you apply generally accounted?
Well, you know what? Since we don't have the budget and since we don't have access to the budget, I can't tell you exactly what that is. We know it's at a minimum $3.4 billion. It's probably in excess of that. GAP would also require that you fund your long-term obligations on an appropriate fashion, which the state has not done. It's that portion which adds to the yearly operating deficit. But GAP also says that you can establish a plan by which you'll meet those obligations, and that's what we're going to do.
Would the legislature actually have to pass something in order to implement GAP? Because Governor Rell, you've said you're going to implement it by an executive order. Governor Rell blamed the legislature for not passing it for 10 years.
I'm going to do two things. I'm going to sign an executive order on January 5th that requires all state agencies, commissions, and departments to report to me under GAP. And I have taken the pledge, and I mean it. I will sign no budget in the spring of the coming year until the legislature has passed legislation that requires the state to do all of its future reporting under generally accepted accounting principles. I don't care what it costs. I don't care if it balloons the deficit. We're going to start telling the truth to the people of Connecticut, and the governor and the legislature are going to start telling the truth to one another.
When I worked in the legislature, this came up every session, but it always was pushed aside because it made the job of getting a budget so much harder, because in all honesty, without using GAP, it's a lot of smoke and mirrors. You already have an incredibly tough task. Is it doable?
Yeah.
Let me put you on hold. We're going to come back after the break and get your answer for that. We are back with Governor-elect Dan Malloy, who's going to continue talking about GAP.
Well, yeah, I want to pick up on Pat's question or comment. I mean, the legislature would not impose generally accepted accounting principles as the law of the state of Connecticut because it makes the job more difficult. That's why a new governor coming in has to do it. We're going to change the rules. We're going to be transparent. We're going to be truthful. Come what may, that's what we're going to start doing. We're not going to play the game that we have a surplus when we don't have a surplus, and that's what we did for most of the last 20 years. And so those days are over. This is an ugly, ugly situation. We're going to begin. First, we stop digging the hole, and then we get out of the hole.
So aside from the budget, how do you go about the hiring process? You already have a chief of staff in place.
I do.
And there's plenty of commissioner positions to fill. And do you ask for everybody's resignation and then go from there?
I believe the governor's asked for everyone's resignation. So we go from there. What we will do is we'll fill positions. Believe me, a lot of people are contacting me about employment with the state, from within the state and from outside the state. This is a great transition period nationally. A lot of new governors have been elected. So we're going to look for the best people. Some of those will be Connecticut people. Some of those may not be Connecticut people. Some may have political backgrounds. Some may be from commerce. What I want is an administration that's filled with people who can get the job done, who have the backgrounds necessary so that the people of Connecticut can have faith in them. So we'll do it. And I'd like to start rolling some stuff out relatively quickly.
Does that include keeping on some of Governor Rell's commissioners?
Entirely possibly. I think there are some good commissioners, some of long standing, that I'm happy to have a conversation with.
And in that vein, Governor Rell made a big issue of a clean break from the Rell administration, et cetera. But the truth is, a good percentage of the commissioners were holdover from the Rowland administration. I mean, you're just going for the best people. It doesn't matter whether they're in administration now.
It doesn't. I mean, there's good Republicans, good Democrats, good independents, good Connecticut citizens, good people from out of the state. This is an open process. I think, ultimately you'll recognize some of the folks that we're putting into positions because they've been involved on one level or another in government, but some of them will be surprises. That's just the reality. There's about 28 commissioner positions, lots of deputy commissioner positions, lots of positions to fill. And doing all of that, we're also mindful of a commitment that I made that we will not fill about 15% of those kinds of positions as a down payment towards the kinds of sacrifices that I'm going to ask the judicial branch, the legislative branch, and everyone in the state to make.
You had mentioned that the state has not been really great at getting in federal dollars for things like transportation, that you had great success as a mayor getting in that federal money. What's your relationship like with our congressional delegation? What's your relationship like with the
I think it's pretty, well, Dick and I have been friends for many, many years, and certainly know all the Congress people, certainly have a long-term relationship with Joe Lieberman. So listen, this is not going to be a problem. There'll be a gigantic difference between my administration and the current administration. That is, I'm going to go to Washington a lot. I'm going to be down there a lot. Even in my transition period of time, I'm going to be calling on cabinet secretaries in Washington, making sure they know who I am. I had conversations yesterday with 2 cabinet secretaries. I've begun that process. We're going to be in it to win it, which means we've got to be down in Washington on a regular basis. I want to look at the operations of the Connecticut office down in Washington. I'll reach conclusions about whether they've been active enough. There may, you know, we're going to take a look at that.
Interesting.
And a little bit closer to home, you paid a visit to the Republicans, as we had mentioned before, in the state legislature, and you did get some pushback in that they won't go along with any sort of new revenue if it's in the form of taxes. But the reality is you really don't need their votes. You still have majorities in both houses. How do you see that playing out?
Well, hey, listen, when I first got elected mayor of the city of Stamford, let's give a little history. 2 of my first 4 appointments were of Republicans. Well, listen, Republicans have good ideas, Democrats have good ideas, unaffiliated voters have good ideas. I'm not the super partisan politician, and the reality is I'm more fiscally conservative than any governor who has served in the last 20 years, period. But I'm also more progressive than any governor who's served in the last 20 years, and I don't think those things can't exist together. In fact, they do exist, at least in one person, Dan Malloy. So I'm prepared to work with everybody. Now, am I surprised that Republicans don't want to raise taxes? No, I'm not surprised at that. Am I surprised that Democrats don't want to cut a lot of things? No, I'm not surprised by that. So this is going to be a very different kind of administration, where we listen to everybody and we make judgments and we make recommendations. We're going to be very activist at the level of the legislature. Showing up at the Republican caucus was great fun. I meant it as a tribute to the fact that those folks are elected and re-elected. They are my partners in governance. I hope we'll have a working relationship. There was one interesting thing that came out of that. After the leaders had called me this wild, liberal, big spender for months, the very next day they said I ran as a moderate. Well, I wish they had told the world that I was a moderate the day before Election Day. Maybe I would have had more than 5,600 vote plurality.
What has this been like on a personal level for you? I mean, all of a sudden, you know, you're the governor-elect. You have a 24/7 police detail with you. Have you taken a moment and been like, oh my God, I'm governor?
Would you ever have a dream come true? You know, listen, this is something that I wanted to do. I believe I have the skill set necessary to lead the state of Connecticut in its greatest financial challenge. It's something I prepared for all of my adult life, whether it was as a prosecutor or a volunteer on boards and commissions in Stamford or mayor of the city of Stamford for 14 years. This is the challenge that I accepted. This is the challenge that I wanted. I'm excited about having the opportunity to build an administration that will take Connecticut through the difficulties that it's currently facing.
Excellent. We appreciate you taking the time and we wish you good luck. We're all interested in seeing how the transition goes. Thanks, Dan.